Raymond, who had been imprisoned by his mother for 5 years, found himself in a rural boarding school, a place that felt like exile. His school life began with only 4 roommates. Simon was a quiet, straightforward, and kind boy, always sociable and active with everyone. Hugh, the boy loved by all, stood out for his charisma. George, on the other hand, was reserved and seemed to have a hidden agenda. One day, George told Raymond that there were no children in that school with decent parents, that he had no one to protect him, and that, therefore, he had come to the right place. 2 weeks later, Raymond understood the true meaning of those words. He realized that there was a boy who lived alone in his room, and from the first time he saw him, he felt an instinctive aversion towards him. This boy appeared every day at 4 in the afternoon, dressed in riding clothes and carrying a whip. Raymond's curiosity grew, and now they needed to know more about Jerome, the enigmatic boy who seemed to hide secrets in his solitude. Raymond remembered that the school had been a monastery a long time ago, located in a small rural town called Bluebell, in a completely isolated place, with no nearby housing. All the students lived in the boarding school, while the school staff resided either in the same place or in Gorin, 90 minutes away by car. There was a swamp called Kelly in the forest surrounding the school, which seemed to have been a lake in the past. At least, that was his impression after a month of being transferred there. It was then that he learned he was the illegitimate son of actress Julia Goodman, a discovery that came when he turned 15, 6 months after the death of his only relative, his father. Julia came to pick him up, and upon seeing each other, they realized they looked remarkably alike. However, in the documents, he was still an orphan, and his legal guardian was not Julia, but her secretary. Shortly after his arrival, Raymond realized that the children in that school were in situations similar to his own. It was not a school in the traditional sense, but rather a place of exile. Just as his existence was Julia's weakness, all the students were their parents' shame. Illegitimate children, criminals, and younger ones displaced in inheritance disputes, they were all considered outcasts, useless, and thorns in their parents' eyes. Raymond was no exception. Upon arriving at the castle, Raymond wondered if that was why Julia had sent him there. A lady welcomed him and told him to put on the scarf, warning him that in Bluebell, winter lasted until May, unlike California. As he climbed the stairs, a man informed him that the doors closed from midnight until 6 in the morning, advising him to return to the dormitory before that time. Although there was no personal attendance check, he would be punished if he left the campus without permission. Raymond asked if he could sleep outside the dormitory as long as he didn't leave the campus, and the man replied that yes, he could stay in the library or in the special activity rooms, indicating that his room was 1 floor up. Raymond walked until he reached room 401. Upon entering, he saw Jorge, who told him that he had arrived late, that he had said he would come at 6, and that they had already had dinner without him. Hugh, upon seeing him, greeted him and introduced himself as Raymond, welcoming him. Simon also introduced himself, saying he would share a room with him. In his mind, Raymond reflected that life in the boarding school was not bad. Simon was quiet and calm. Hugh was cheerful and lively, although he was always looking at his laptop, and George always told him things. However, they were not the only boys on the top floor. Raymond thought that now they had to talk about Jerome, who always came to his room at 4 in the afternoon. Jerome had trivial conversations with the boys and returned to his room at 6 o'clock sharp. He lived alone in room 402. Raymond reflected on what Jorge said about the lack of students, but he did not believe his words. Jorge rode every day, always dressed in riding clothes and carrying a whip. Often, for fun, he would lift Hugh's chin with the whip, which made Raymond uncomfortable. Jerome also tried to talk to him and be friendly, but when Raymond kept his distance, Jerome did not come closer than necessary. However, sometimes, when he felt Jerome's gaze and looked up, he found his eyes staring back at him. Although he did not like Jerome, school life was good. Before arriving at the school, Julia did not want the world to know about Raymond, so she homeschooled him and forbade him from going out, a way of acting that became strange until it turned into confinement. Raymond thought about how to take revenge on Julia for that. He did not want to know what kind of relationship she had with his father, and for some reason he had been confined for 5 years, thinking about how to get back at her. With those strange feelings, he arrived at the school. However, being around boys his age after such a long time was more pleasant than he had imagined. Although it was difficult to call them friends, there was a certain distance between them, and at some point, they began to feel like a somewhat affectionate family. One day, George said that in that school there was not a single child with normal parents, that there were no ordinary children, and that there was no one to protect them, asserting that, therefore, Raymond had come to the right place. 2 weeks later, Raymond realized the true meaning of his words. Raymond was climbing the stairs thinking that, perhaps, it was because it was the weekend that the dormitory was quiet. Simon, Hugh, and George had also mentioned that they had plans to go out. Upon entering, he found Jerome, who asked him if Simon had come back early and reminded him that he had said he would stay out that night, confirming that Simon would be staying over. Raymond, surprised, asked Jerome how he had gotten in there. Jerome replied that he had already returned from going out, to which Raymond clarified that he had not gone out. Jerome asked him why he had not gone to town, and Raymond, in turn, asked him why he had not gone and how he had entered the room, questioning whether he had the key. Jerome admitted that yes, he had the key because the boy who lived there before had given it to him. Raymond, getting up, began to speak, but Jerome, seeing that he was leaving, whipped him on the leg, asking if it hurt. Jerome ordered him not to get up until he gave him permission and told him to go wash his face. Fearfully, Raymond got up and headed to the bathroom, thinking that Jerome was crazy for hitting people with a whip. He realized that Jerome had been waiting for an opportunity all along, had remained silent while bothering him, and had taken advantage of the fact that there was no one around that day to get his revenge. Turning his head, he told himself that he would not be defeated. Upon exiting, Jerome asked him why he was taking so long to wash his face. Raymond threw a punch at Jerome, but he managed to anticipate it and laughed heartily, enjoying the moment. Frustrated, Raymond shouted that he was crazy. Jerome, with a smile, replied that that was why he liked him. Determined, Raymond ordered him to leave and to drop the key. Jerome, raising his hands, let go of the key without protest. Then he turned to Simon and commented that he had just taken a light walk, asking him how it had gone with the babysitter. Simon replied that it had been a good time. After that day, Raymond observed Jerome, but he found nothing special about him. He wondered if no one had noticed that Jerome was crazy. As George had said, there was no one normal there, and among them all, Jerome was the strangest. However, Raymond noticed something suspicious. Everyone pretended to treat Jerome normally, but at the same time, they kept a certain distance. The next day, George approached Raymond and told him that he didn't know that Jerome was of British royalty and was even in the line of succession to the throne. Raymond thought that was why he had the room to himself, but he wondered why a member of royalty would come to such a remote school. Raymond asked George if he was close to Jerome, and George replied that it could be yes and it could be no. Confused, Raymond asked him what that meant. George explained that if Jerome was nice to him, then they were friends, but if he ignored him, they were not. Finally, George asked Raymond why he was so interested in Jerome. Raymond honestly replied that it was because Jerome was interested in him. The opportunity for revenge came sooner than Raymond thought. During lunch, someone suggested a soccer game, and Jerome watched with interest, eventually deciding to join the game. In the middle of the match, Jerome told Raymond that he ran well and asked if he liked soccer. Irritated, Raymond replied not to talk to him, crazy. Jerome winked at him, which made Raymond wonder why he did that. At that moment, Raymond thought it was his chance and decided to smash Jerome's face with the ball. Kicking hard, the ball went straight to Jerome's face, hitting him forcefully. Raymond, pretending to be concerned, exclaimed that he was sorry, that since he was wearing shoes he couldn't kick the ball well, and offered to help him up. Jerome, with a headache, told him he was fine, although his vision was a bit blurry, and asked him to accompany him to the infirmary. Raymond, distrustful, wondered what Jerome was planning. He took him to the infirmary and, upon arriving, said he was done and was leaving. Unbeknownst to him, as he turned around, Jerome grabbed an object and hit him from behind, injuring Raymond. Jerome, placing his foot on Raymond's chest, reminded him not to move until he gave him permission, claiming that he was really interested in him. Raymond, challenging him, asked if he wanted his love back, mocking his madness. Jerome, with a smile, replied that yes, he wanted his love. Raymond firmly told him that would never happen. Jerome, confident, retorted that he did not think the same, assuring that he always got what he wanted. Raymond dismissed him, stating that it was a big mistake. Jerome, saying goodbye, told him they would see each other next time. With that, Jerome left, and Raymond, lying on the floor, reflected on how strong, evil, and cunning Jerome was, promising that next time it would not be so easy. Simon entered the room, and Raymond told him that he thought he was going to go out for a run. Simon, in a serious tone, expressed that if it didn't bother him, he would like to know what was going on. He mentioned that he had forgotten the mail when he left, but that it had been a good idea to come back. Raymond, grateful but firm, replied that if his intention was to help, he appreciated it, but it was not necessary, and he did not need his help. Simon, recognizing that he was overstepping, apologized but insisted that he would like to help treat his wounds. As Simon treated Raymond's wounds, he noticed that he did not say a single word. Simon gently touched the area around the injury and with his warm hands, carefully applied a bandage. Raymond felt the touch from his stomach to his shoulder, even on his side, remembering that each wound had been caused by Jerome's whip. Definitely, he thought he would get his revenge. The key to his revenge came the following Tuesday, as Jerome always carried his whip with him when he rode. Raymond planned to make Jerome fall off his horse, and at that moment, he would take the whip. Grabbing a stick, he thought it would work and wondered if Jerome would still be smiling after he hit him with his own whip. Seeing Jerome, Raymond got excited, knowing it was the perfect moment. In a rush, Raymond whipped Jerome, who fell to the ground, but Raymond also lost his balance and fell. Jerome got up and told him that was where he was hiding. He pulled out his whip, and Raymond, surprised, wondered how he had known he was there, not understanding how he had realized it. Jerome, with a smile, warned him that it would be better if he listened to him. He explained that he had set an ambush on a rainy day, something classic that he loved, but that classics were easy to deduce. Finally, he told Raymond that he was sure he had learned a lot from that experience. Upon arriving at the room, his classmates saw him and were surprised, asking what had happened and if he had fallen in the mud. George mocked his appearance, saying he looked fantastic and that it was the best look he had seen on him so far. Hugh offered to get him a towel, but Raymond declined, saying he would take a shower now. In the bathroom, Raymond sat in the tub, but it was there that Simon arrived. Simon told him that he had said he didn't need his help, but that wasn't true, that he really needed it. He explained that the situation was too much to handle alone and that they had to tell the headmaster, as that kind of violence was wrong. Raymond was skeptical, asking if Simon really wanted to help him. Simon nodded, and Raymond explained that if he told the headmaster, he would contact his guardian and use the incident to expel him from the school, and that he would never be able to return. He told him that his mother would lock him up again, just like she had done 5 years ago. Raymond told Simon that if he wanted to help him, go ahead, but that it was hypocritical. Simon was silent for a moment, and then told Raymond that he really wanted to help him, in the way that he wanted. Well, I really don't know if Simon ate Raymond's ice cream, because he was about to, but they cut the scene. But anyway, let's continue. Raymond was sunbathing by a window when Jerome arrived and greeted him. Raymond responded with a greeting, and they exchanged some friendly punches. However, Hugh had to intervene, exclaiming what was wrong with Raymond and if he had lost his mind. While Hugh held him, Raymond thought it was Jerome who had lost his mind, not him. Hugh, concerned, asked him why he had hit him and if he was crazy. Raymond told him that the why he had to ask Jerome, who added that it was a secret between them. That night, Raymond was in his dormitory with Jerome, who reminded him that he had previously told him he was good at nursing. Jerome explained that the reason he was good at nursing was that he used to do that kind of work frequently. Raymond asked him why he had to do it, and Jerome told him that a long time ago, a friend of his was very sick, and he was the only one who could take care of him. Now his friend had gone to a faraway place for treatment and had lost contact with him. Raymond expressed his sorrow, and Jerome told him it was okay, that they were not close friends. Jerome, curious, asked Raymond what he meant by saying that his mother had locked him in the mansion for 5 years. Raymond, surprised by the question, explained that his mother had locked him up because she felt uncomfortable with his existence in the world. Jerome had no more questions, and the conversation stopped. The next day, Raymond was walking with George, who reminded him that he had wondered if there was no one who could protect him. Raymond confirmed that he had no one, and that George had mentioned that all the schools were in similar situations. George warned him that he needed to make Jerome an enemy, as there was no one on his side in the school. Raymond questioned why, if it was because of Jerome's identity. George explained that he had been there for less than 2 months and did not know anything about the atmosphere or the flow of the school. If he was truly cornered, he would end up on a path from which he could not escape alone. Raymond stated that he knew that. George continued, saying that if he was in trouble, there would be no one who could help him. If he made Jerome his enemy, it would be the same as making the whole school his enemy. Raymond, determined, told him that just because George wouldn't help him didn't mean he was his enemy. His only enemy was Jerome, and the only person he was fighting was him. George insisted that he was wrong, that negligence and ignorance were violence. Raymond replied that nothing could be proven simply by negligence and ignorance. George, seriously, warned him that there would come a time when he would feel that abandonment and ignorance were violence. Everything in the school would change drastically, and by then it would be too late. He said goodbye, stating that he would leave. Raymond, determined, responded that it was fine and that he would walk a little more. Later, at Kelly's swamp, Raymond reflected on the place he had been while walking with Simon and Hugh. Despite everything, he liked the path to Kelly, as there were few people around and there was no need to disturb anyone. In his mind, he thought that Simon was a good guy and had to admit that he was handsome and in good shape. He always dressed neatly and paid attention to his appearance. However, the downside was that he was very direct and didn't talk much. Although he had brought him breakfast, they had never had a private conversation, which seemed really strange to him. Despite that, Simon was now his friend. Suddenly, Raymond heard a strange noise. The unknown sound came from the right direction, and at that moment, like a bolt of lightning, he realized he had to run. That sound could only be something he did not want to face. It was Jerome riding a horse when he came out of the bushes and, at the same time, hit Raymond with his whip. Jerome, with a challenging smile, suggested that they do that more often, claiming that if Raymond considered it a game, he didn't mind being chased. He asked him how long he thought he could hold out. Raymond, determined, challenged him to try and see how far he could go. Jerome grabbed Raymond by the shirt, and Raymond, surprised, asked him what he was doing. Jerome replied that he would let him know how far he could go. Raymond, feeling threatened, asked him to stop doing that and not to try anything else. Jerome, with a cold look, told him that he had seen him like that before. Confused, Raymond asked Jerome what he wanted. Jerome, with a sinister smile, told him that after doing everything he could, if Raymond could no longer do anything, then he should just throw him in there. Scared, Raymond asked where and what he should throw. Jerome, in a mocking tone, reminded him that alligators lived in Kelly. Jerome splashed water on Raymond, who screamed desperately not to do it and that he wanted to get out of there. Jerome, with a mocking smile, asked if he was giving up. Raymond, frightened, admitted that yes, he would give up and begged him to save him. Jerome, without compassion, told him that he didn't want to do that. Raymond, in a state of panic, pleaded to be pulled out, acknowledging that he had made a mistake. As Raymond sank into the water, Jerome told him that that was not what he was asking for. At that moment, Raymond thought he couldn't breathe and that everything was turning dark. Suddenly, Jerome pulled him out of the water, and a voice commented that he really almost killed him. Jerome, unfazed, replied that he could have left him in there a little longer. Raymond, still trembling, wondered if there was someone else and how Jerome had known he was waiting in the stable. He questioned how he had known he was going for a walk in Kelly and if he had really felt that he couldn't beat Jerome. The idea that Jerome had an accomplice unsettled him. Noticing Raymond's confusion, Jerome asked him if he was crazy and if he wanted to know who it was. He told him that, as expected, it was a strong boy. Then, he turned to the mysterious figure, announcing that it was finally his favorite moment and that Raymond was curious about his face. He asked him to come closer so he could see him. It was Simon who interrupted by saying that he was wrong, that it was not just Jerome's favorite moment, but also our favorite moment. Simon expressed that it was exactly the expression he was expecting, and assumed that he really trusted him. He then mentioned that he needed to take him and wash him, but not in his room, as George knew he was out. Ray, worried, called out to Simon and asked why. Jerome, observing the situation, commented that it was poor and pathetic what was happening to Raymond. Ray reflected in his mind on why, despite knowing nothing about him, someone had gone to great lengths to force him to submit. He realized that this question was stupid, as it had been happening since the day he arrived at Bluebell, trembling from the cold. Now he understood why Jerome knew so much about him and how he could be so detailed, but there was still one unanswered question. Why him? Out loud, Ray wondered among so many people. Why did it have to be him? A fact he discovered with Simon's appearance. He realized that they had been watching him since his first day at school and questioned again why they had forced him to submit. Jerome, for his part, announced that he was going to enter the dormitory from now on, but he didn't want to make a scene. Ray, intrigued, asked what he was going to do. Jerome raised his hand to hit Ray, apologizing and asking for patience. The blow left Ray unconscious, and when he suddenly woke up, he sighed and wondered why he had handcuffs, feeling the need to get out first. Jerome told him to sit down, assuring him that he had many questions. Simon interrupted, stating that Raymond would not speak first and would wait until one of them spoke. If they were referring to the incident on Tuesday, both Jerome and he did not know that Ray was hiding in the stable. Ray, confused, wondered how it was possible that Jerome was not surprised. Simon observed that Ray didn't have a shred of personality at school and warned him to be careful, as he had seen him so excited all day. Jerome, for his part, assured him that there was no way he could suddenly lose his temper, so he thought it must have been his charming Raymond who had done it. He confessed that he really liked him and admired his fighting spirit and healthy body. Ray, determined, said it was time to hear the reason behind all this confusion and asked Jerome to speak. Jerome explained that he had probably wondered why they were doing all this, but there would be no clear answer. They simply did it for fun. Ray, incredulous, asked what the price of that fight was, if it was to hit him and then wait for his revenge. Jerome clarified that no, it was a hunting game and that they were the hunters. Ray, disappointed, commented that what he was saying was boring and that he would leave such a tedious game, suggesting they find someone else. Jerome, with a smile, asked if the adorable Raymond was not happy with their courtship, while Simon asserted that this time was special. Ray, frustrated, demanded to be let go, but Jerome refused, maintaining his grip. Ray, defiantly, asked why, implying that Jerome was afraid he would break his nose. Jerome asked Raymond if he had ever had a boyfriend, insinuating that after being locked up for 5 years, he didn't believe he could have pulled the goose properly. Simon, not missing the opportunity, told Raymond that he didn't seem so naive and asked him to answer if he had ever had a boyfriend. Ray sincerely admitted that he had not. Jerome, with a smile, stated that then they would be his first men. Ray, surprised, questioned if that meant they wanted to be with him by force. Jerome, unfazed, asked what he meant by that, reminding him that he had almost died that day and suggesting he go back to his room and rest a bit. Ray, confused, could only ask what was happening. Later, George approached Ray and asked what kind of walk lasted so many hours. Ray, with a tone of frustration, explained that he had gotten lost in the woods. George, with an air of superiority, reminded him that he had told him he knew nothing about that school. Ray was in his bed, feeling lost. Hugh, upon waking up, told him that he had been very sick and that, according to George, he had gotten lost in the woods the day before. Ray replied that Simon had taken care of him all day and that he had now gone out to get food, so he would be back soon. At that moment, Simon entered the room and asked Raymond to eat at least a little and to take his medicine, reminding him that although the fever had gone down, it could rise again. Ray, distrustful, told Simon that he had betrayed him and that he had trusted him. Simon, trying to calm him down, assured him that he was still the same since the day they met. Ray, disappointed, thought that Simon was on his side, but Simon insisted that he wanted to help him. In his mind, Ray reflected on how he had let Simon do whatever he wanted, feeding him, changing his clothes, and taking care of him as if he were a doll. Ray admitted that he had ended up playing the role of the rabbit in the hunting game, understanding that for them, all of this was just fun. Jerome enjoyed his suffering and would not stop until it was all over. Ray knew that this hunting game would only stop when one of them left the school or he died. With determination, Ray thought about how Jerome had tried to kill him and how Simon had betrayed him. He decided that he would take revenge on both of them and had already established the order of his revenge. He would start with Simon, who slept in the same room as him every night, and he felt confident that it would be easy to make Simon suffer first. In the dining hall, George told Raymond that he needed to eat well to recover soon and that he had to be in shape to be able to fight Jerome, hoping that they would both get along. Ray, confused, asked what he meant. George warned him that Jerome would eat him alive. Ray, annoyed, replied that he acted as if he knew everything and asked if he knew that Simon and Jerome were involved, implying that he was not the first in that situation. George, without hesitation, confirmed that he was the seventh. Ray, frustrated, suggested to George that he take a walk, mentioning that it was a beautiful summer night. George got up and left. Later, Hugh wondered where George was, and Ray informed him that he had gone out for a night walk, questioning what had happened. Hugh, for his part, commented that Simon had gone to bed. Upon hearing this, Ray decided to go to his room and close the door, thinking that Simon was not sleeping, at least not until he had fallen asleep. Inside the room, he found Simon, and Ray got on top of him, warning him that if he brought anyone into the swamp, he would have to pay for it. Simon, with a smile, replied that it seemed fair to him. Taking advantage of the situation, Ray tried to choke Jerome to annihilate him, but before he could do anything, Jerome attacked him with a taser. Jerome, in a mocking voice, asked if he was okay, reminding him that he had had a tough day and wishing him a good night's sleep. That night, Raymond had a very strange dream. In his dream, he was on a carousel and at some point, he realized that he was not riding a carousel horse, but a live horse. He woke up shaken, and in the morning, George asked him if he was awake. Raymond replied that he was, and George commented that things had not gone very well the night before. Raymond remembered that Simon had maintained admirable composure until the moment he frantically strangled him. He reflected on how Simon never got angry or retaliated, and he thought that getting revenge on Jerome would only make them happier. He realized that he had to bait them, just as they had baited him, and he wondered if there was any way to trick them in what they were waiting for. Ray entered a place and was surprised to see that no one was there. He found an envelope and, upon opening it, saw some compromising photos. He wondered who had left them and what they would do this time. Upon seeing what the envelope contained, he realized it was a photo of him, taken from his bed. He felt a tremor that he didn't know if it was fear or anger, and he decided to choose anger. He told himself that he had to stay calm, although without realizing it, the game had already begun. He accepted the humiliation but promised himself not to give up. Ray questioned who had sent the photo and concluded that it must have been Jerome and Simon, who had said they would violate him and had actually done so. If he hadn't regained his composure, he would have immediately run to break down Jerome's door. He realized that they were just waiting for him to take revenge because that was what they wanted. In that case, he decided that he would not take the bait and would wait. Ray thought about how Jerome and Simon would react to his lack of response and decided that he needed to observe them. However, before that, he needed to hide the photos, as they knew every corner of his room. He resolved to hide them in a place that was not that room so they wouldn't find them. In the library, the worker asked Raymond if he had never borrowed anything. Raymond introduced himself, saying that he was Raymond. The worker informed him that he could borrow up to 15 books. Raymond, relieved, replied that he would return them and come back. He walked through the library looking for a book and, looking around, thought that even if someone was watching him, it would not be easy to find him, as to figure out where he was hiding it, they would have to search the entire library. Upon arriving, he was greeted by George and Hugh, who asked him if he was going to study. Raymond, confused, asked them why they were looking at him like that. George told him that he and studying did not go together at all. Hugh, excited, asked what subject it was and if he wanted to study with him, as he planned to study all weekend. Raymond, determined, replied that he was not going to study, that those books had nothing to do with exams, and that he planned to go out over the weekend. Hugh, surprised, exclaimed that that was great. Raymond continued by saying that he would spend the night in a hotel and that he would go read some books. Hugh, incredulous, wondered why they had to study. Meanwhile, in his mind, Raymond reflected on the photos he had seen earlier and discovered a total of 4 facts. First, there were 2 people in the photos. Second, only in one photo did both people appear at the same time. Third, the photos had been taken at least a month ago. Fourth, the people involved in this matter were at least 4, but there could be more. He recognized that the 2 people in the photos were Jerome and Simon. Although their faces were hidden, he could recognize their bodies. Raymond recalled that the photo in which both humiliated him was not taken with a tripod, as the crooked angle indicated it was taken by hand. This meant that there was a new person involved, whom he called Individual C. He realized that Jerome and Simon had declared another game with that photo, a game of hide and seek, and if he did not find Individual C at the right moment, he would suffer another intolerable humiliation. Raymond thought that these events had occurred at least a month ago. On his body, which was clean and without a single scar, the wounds from his fight with Jerome had accumulated, confirming this. He also remembered that there were at least 4 people present at the scene, and although the photos showed only 3 identifiable people, there was a fatal flaw. The shadow of person D was not very visible, but at the bottom of the photo, there was the shadow of a person who was completely unknown, Individual D. Raymond concluded that Jerome and Simon were probably so satisfied with the photo that, while imagining his reaction upon seeing it, they did not notice the flaw. However, there was a clear question in his mind. How was it possible that he did not wake up even once, considering that those actions continued for so long? Ray reflected on whether Hugh and George were aware of the events that were happening, considering they lived in the same residence. He was not naive enough to believe that they didn't know, so he concluded that they were definitely aware. He wondered if Hugh and George were simply spectators, or if they were accomplices. In reality, he didn't know much about Hugh, only that he had many friends, was cheerful and always smiled. Despite his good opinion of him for his pleasant personality, he found it difficult to determine whether he was an accomplice or not. On the other hand, George seemed quite suspicious to him. He had been close to Jerome and Simon, and it was George who revealed to him that he was the 7th victim. Ray questioned how he knew all that, and if it was because he was involved. Perhaps George had been his predecessor,